What happens when you spend your whole life trying to impress a father who never truly saw you as his own? Jessica Monroe was a rising star in Silicon Valley, a woman who had everything except her father's approval. On his 70th birthday, she gave him the most expensive gift of her life, hoping just this once he'd look at her with pride. But what if the person you're trying to earn love from isn't even your real family? Why did Jessica carry a DNA envelope to her father's birthday party? And how did one heartbreaking discovery lead her to rebuild her life and define family on her own terms? This is a story of betrayal, silence, and finally, freedom. I'm Jessica Monroe, 35 years old, and if you had asked anyone at Tech Pulse Global who I was, they would have said, "Oh, Jessica, she's brilliant. Built an AI engine that predicted market shifts 6 months out. Won Innovator of the Year, and that's all true." But if you'd asked my father, Walter Monroe, to telecom tycoon of Palo Alto, probably would have just shrugged and said something like, "She works with data. Doesn't everyone these days?" He was turning 70 this year, a milestone. My brother Zachary had been planning the birthday gala with our mother Diane since February. It was going to be one of those classic Monroe events, a rented vineyard, a custom whiskey bar, and enough influencers and investors to fill a small convention center. Of course, Walter insisted it be hosted at our estate instead for the optics. Legacy, as he called it. I wasn't planning to attend at first. I told myself I was too busy with client integrations and preseason conferences. But deep down, I knew why I hesitated. I didn't want to be invisible again. Still, after I got the promotion and the award, I thought maybe this year would be different. So I made a decision I once swore I wouldn't. I bought my father a gift. Not just any gift. A black Tesla Roadster, top of the line, dual motor, custom interior, 0 to 60 in under 2 seconds. The exact model he'd once admired at the Palo Alto Classic Car Gala, but claimed was too flashy to be serious. I called it a gesture of gratitude. But the truth? It was a gamble, a bet. That this car, this shiny symbol of my success, might finally crack through the wall between us. Might finally get him to say what every child, no matter how old, secretly wants to hear. "I'm proud of you. It cost me nearly my entire bonus, but I justified it. I told myself it wasn't about money. It was about Lover, the absence of it." The car was scheduled to arrive the day before the party. I arranged it to be delivered discreetly to the estate's private driveway. I wanted it to be a quiet moment. Just me and him. Maybe even a conversation. Not about business or Zachary or politics, but about us. Something simple. But as I packed my clutch that morning, sliding in my phone, lipstick, and the spare key fob, my hand hesitated over the one thing I hadn't decided what to do with yet. The envelope. It was slim, cream-colored, sealed. Inside was the paternity test I had ordered 6 weeks ago after a 23andMe result flagged a genetic discrepancy in my ancestry. I hadn't been searching for any, just playing with data as usual, but the numbers didn't add up. My chromosomes didn't match my father's in key identifiers. I told myself it had to be a mistake. Then I collected a hair sample from his old travel brush during a visit home, sent it to a private lab, waited, and here it was. Confirmed. Walter Monroe was not my biological father. I hadn't told anyone. Not my best friend Lacey. Not even my mother. And definitely not Walter. But now, walking into his birthday party, the envelope was in my clutch, lying quietly under the lipstick and key fob, like a landmine waiting for pressure. I wasn't sure why I brought it. Maybe for proof. Maybe to remind myself that the distance between us wasn't my fault. Or maybe because a part of me wanted to use it. The estate looked as ostentatious as ever. Luxury cars lined the circular drive. A string quartet played by the fountain. Guests in linen suits and cocktail dresses sipped from stemless glasses and whispered names like Elon, Zuckerberg, and Series C funding. And there, at the top of the stairs, was Walter, towering, tanned, gripping a glass of scotch like it was a trophy. He hadn't seen me yet. I took a breath, squared my shoulders, and stepped inside. No one knew it yet. But tonight would be the last night the Monroe family would ever pretend to be whole. The Monroe estate had a strange way of making me feel smaller the older I got. As a kid, it felt like a castle. Now, it just felt like a monument to everything I was never allowed to be. I weaved my way through the crowd tech CEOs, investors, family friends who acted like they'd known me better than I knew myself. They all had that same tone when they greeted me. "Jessica, still in New York? You're always on the move, huh? Wow, I heard you're working with predictive data now. That's very niche." There was always an ellipsis in their voices, a pause before the compliment, as if they couldn't quite fit me into the Monroe narrative. And truthfully, I never really did. Zachary did. My younger brother had always been the perfect heir to the Monroe legacy. He walked like Dad. Talked like him, too. From the time he was 10, he could mimic Walter's tone in meetings. By 15, he was already shadowing him at company retreats. Now, at 31, he was the COO of Monroe Telecommunications, already being whispered as the future CEO. And Dad adored him for it. Zach never had to prove himself. His mere presence was seen as potential. Everything I had, I fought for. Scholarships, jobs, promotions. I'd hacked my way through a world that didn't expect women, let alone daughters to lead in AI analytics. But in this house, none of it mattered. I caught sight of my mother across the garden. Diane Monroe, still elegant at 65, in her signature pearls and pale blue silk dress. She waved at me with a soft smile, the same smile she used when trying to calm family tension without ever naming it. I approached her, and she hugged me gently, pressing a hand to my cheek. "You look stunning, sweetheart," she whispered. "How long are you staying?" "Just the weekend," I replied. "Back to New York Monday morning. Still working those crazy hours?" I nodded. She looked down briefly. "I worry about you sometimes. You don't need to." We stood together for a moment in silence, watching guests swirl around us like clockwork gears. Everything in this house functioned around appearance as flawless, detached appearances. As a child, I'd found my refuge in books, buried in the back of the estate's library while the adults laughed too loudly in the cocktail room. I was the kid who never quite belonged, even at home. At family dinners, Walter would dominate conversation with industry talk, business plans, merger prospects. He loved to toss so long as it wasn't mine. I remembered getting my acceptance letter to Stanford. I ran into the kitchen holding the envelope, practically glowing. His response? "Good school, but if you want to be taken seriously, you should have gone east. MIT or Princeton, you know that." Zachary got into USC with average grades, and Dad opened a bottle of champagne. I remember watching them clink glasses as I stood by the sink. My mother never intervened. Not once. There was always this subtle shrinking in her presence when Walter was in the room. Alone, she was warm, playful. We'd play Chopin together on the grand piano when I was home for holidays. But when Walter walked in, it was like a light dimmed in her chest. She deferred. She smiled tightly. She shifted. Sometimes I wondered who she really was before him. Even now, standing beside me, I could feel her tension, her constant scanning of the party for his gaze, her posture tightening whenever he drew near. "Are you nervous about tonight?" she asked gently. I blinked. "Why would I be nervous?" "You know your father," she said. "He's particular." That was always the word she used. Particular. As if emotional neglect could be folded neatly into a personality quirk. I didn't respond. Instead, I let my eyes drift toward the gleaming Tesla in the driveway still, parked at an angle designed for maximum visibility. I could see guests admiring it, pointing, taking photos. It wasn't the car that hurt. It was what it represented. Every ounce of achievement I had funneled into a single object, hoping to buy attention, maybe love. But the longer I stood there, the more it felt like a monument to my desperation. "Has he seen it yet?" I asked. My mother followed my gaze. Yes, he was surprised. Did he ask who it was from? He assumed it was a corporate gift. One of the investors. Maybe. I swallowed hard. "And you didn't correct him?" She looked away. That was the thing about my mother. She never lied outright. She just never stood up. My brother joined us then, walking with that same confident ease he always had. His hand rested lightly on my shoulder as he kissed Mom on the cheek. "Jess," he said, "you made it." "Of course I did. It's Dad's big day." He grinned. "You look great. Wall Street is treating you well, huh?" "Manhattan, not Wall Street," I corrected. "And it's analytics, not finance." Right, he said, waving it off. "I keep forgetting exactly what you do. All those models and formulas. It's hard to keep up." It wasn't. He just didn't care to. I forced a smile. "I'm sure you're busy managing the entire company. Can't expect you to remember what your sister does." He chuckled as if I'd told a joke, then turned to our mother. "Dad's about to start the speech setup. He asked for you." She nodded, brushing imaginary lint from her sleeve. "I should go." And just like that, she disappeared. Zach turned to me. "Try not to stir anything tonight, okay?" "What does that mean?" "Nothing. Just, you know how Dad is. Let's keep it smooth." I stared at him, stunned by how casually he said it. As if I was the problem. As if my mere presence might be the crack in the porcelain. "You ever think," I said quietly, "that maybe the problem isn't me showing up but no one ever seeing me?" He didn't answer. Just patted my shoulder again and walked away. I stood in place for a long time, watching the sun dip behind the vineyard hills. And somewhere deep in my clutch bag the envelope waited. Like it had been waiting my whole life. The sky had turned a honeyed gold as the string quartet transitioned into a soft jazz trio, and waitstaff began lighting the hanging lanterns strung across the garden like floating halos. The Monroe birthday gala was in full swing. Guests sipped Syrah under white canopies. Glasses clinked. Laughs floated. It was all effortless, at least on the surface. And then came the voice that never needed a microphone to command attention. "Walter Monroe, can I have everyone's attention for a few moments before dinner?" The crowd shifted, conversations dissolving as guests instinctively turned toward the stone staircase where my father stood with a tumbler of Glenlivet in hand, framed by golden uplights and a soft breeze that gave his navy suit the illusion of movement. He looked presidential, like someone born to be admired. 70, he began, drawing a pause that earned him polite laughter. A number that sneaks up on you if you're not careful. But in my case, it came with dividends. More chuckles. I've built companies. I've built this home. But my greatest investment, my legacy, is in my children. I stood near the outer ring of the gathering, one foot tucked slightly behind the other, every muscle in my body tense. He turned to Zachary first, of course. "This one here," he said, gesturing to my brother, who grinned like a man used to the limelight, has kept the Monroe name relevant in ways even I couldn't have imagined. "Zach, your leadership at Monroe Telecom during our last pivot made me realize something. I didn't just build a company, I built a successor." The crowd applauded. "And as we look toward the future of our brand, our family, and this community, I know we're in capable hands." He raised his glass toward Zachary, who raised his own in return. Cheers followed by a sea of nods and murmurs of approval. Not a single word about me, not a mention of the Tesla gleaming in the driveway, not even a nod in my direction. I stood there, invisible in a room of 200. A family friend, Carla Davenport, sidled up to me with a full glass of wine and a sympathetic smile. "Jessica, I have to say, that car you brought, Absolutely gorgeous. Walter must have been floored. I tried to smile. He thought it was from one of his business partners. Carla blinked. You're joking. I shook my head. She opened her mouth, closed it, and took a sip of wine instead. He's a complicated man. That was the polite term, the public-facing term. The reality was something much colder, something far less explainable. A few minutes later, I wandered toward the long glass window that overlooked the circular driveway. A group had gathered outside. Investors, old golf friends, a local tech podcaster. They surrounded the Tesla, admiring, circling. And in the center of them, Walter. He had the driver's door open, gesturing toward the minimal interior design like he'd personally customized it. Laughing at something one of the men said, one hand on the wheel like he'd just closed a billion-dollar acquisition. He never looked prouder. I watched him point toward the Tesla's digital display, describing the charging capacity and how smooth it drives. They hung on his every word. I couldn't hear what he was saying. I didn't need to, because I saw it. The pride he was so effortlessly capable of displaying when it suited him. The way his entire face lit up with admiration not for me, but for the object I gave him. The object he'd already claimed as his own. That's when Zach appeared beside me. He didn't look at the window. He just said, "You really dropped a lot of cash on that thing, huh?" "It wasn't about the money," he exhaled. "Then what was it about?" I turned to him. "You really have to ask?" He shrugged, like the answer was irrelevant. "Jess, you can't force something that isn't natural." I froze. "What do you mean? You and Dad. It's just oil and water. Always has been. And this whole Tesla stunt? Honestly, it feels like you're trying to buy your way into something you already left." "I never left," I whispered. I was pushed out. He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "Look, I'm not saying you haven't worked hard. I know you have, but you've always been kind of outside the Monroe path. You took your own road, and that's fine. You just can't expect to be celebrated for not playing the game." I turned fully to face him. "So success only matters when it looks like yours?" He didn't answer. "Zach," I continued, my voice tight, "do you know what it's like to spend 30 years being treated like an afterthought in your own family?" He didn't flinch. "Do you know what it's like to constantly feel responsible for keeping everything together?" That stunned me. "Dad leans on me," he added. "He counts on me. And maybe I didn't ask for that, but I show up. I play my part. You left. You created your own world. And I respect that. But you don't get to show up once a year and expect everything to bend around your narrative." I opened my mouth to respond and stopped. Because nothing I could say would make him see what I saw. Nothing would undo the truth he'd already chosen. I turned back toward the window. Walter was now sitting in the driver's seat of the Tesla, letting someone else take the passenger side. The crowd around him laughed again as he honked the horn twice playfully, like a kid in a candy store. I didn't move, but I felt something inside me break. Not the part that wanted his approval. That had shattered years ago. No, this was something deeper. The part of me that still believed, on some naive level, that decency could overcome denial, that a good gesture might be seen clearly. Zach excused himself quietly, leaving me alone again. And in that moment, I felt the envelope in my purse, like it was burning through the leather. I could see it now with crystal clarity. It wasn't that Walter didn't love me less. It was that he didn't see me at all. And maybe never had. I slipped away from the crowd before dinner was served. Nobody noticed. Not Walter, not Zachary, not even the guests I'd spoken to earlier. I walked through the rear patio doors, past the curated bonsai trees and the silent water feature, until I reached the old part of the house, the West Wing Library. It had always been the quietest room in the estate. It smelled of worn leather, polished oak, and the faintest trace of pipe tobacco no one had smoked in decades. The fireplace sat unused, framed by oil portraits of dead Monroes, their eyes fixed permanently on nothing. I used to love it here. When I was a child, I'd hide in this room with books too heavy for my lap, escaping into worlds where courage and kindness were rewarded, where the overlooked character ended up mattering most. Now, I just felt foolish, forever believing real life worked that way. I sank into the same velvet chair I always had, third from the window, tucked behind the chess set no one touched. The room was still dim, just the way I remembered. Except tonight, it didn't feel like a sanctuary. It felt like exile. Across the wall were the family photo shelves, glass-framed moments from Monroe holidays, gala events, vacation homes in Aspen and Positano. In one picture, Walter had his hand on Zachary's shoulder, both of them in ski gear, grinning like they were born to conquer mountains. In another, Diane sat in the middle of the family Christmas table, laughing with cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. And then there were the ones with me, or barely with me. In every photo where I appeared, I was either off to the side or leaning just a bit out of frame, like a last-minute addition. In one, I wasn't looking at the camera at all. In none of them was I ever in the center. And suddenly, the weight of the past 30 years collapsed in on itself. It wasn't just the speech, or the car, or the erasure. It was all of it. The years I spent eating Thanksgiving dinners in silence, while Zachary explained market shifts to Dad. The emails I sent about promotions that went unanswered. The piano recitals that no one attended. The Stanford graduation ceremony where Walter left after 15 minutes because he had a critical call with investors. I had made peace with disappointment so many times that I forgot what it felt like to be angry. I just wore it like armor. Quiet, polished, impressive, untouched. But now, alone in this room, I let the armor fall. I covered my face and cried. Not quiet tears, not graceful ones. Real, heaving sobs that shook through my ribs and echoed in the high ceilings. The kind of tears you don't even feel until after they've stopped. I cried for the little girl who waited by the window every Friday at 4 p.m. for her dad to come home and ask how her math test went, only to hear him ask Zach about his soccer practice instead. I cried for the college sophomore who got offered a research grant, but never mentioned it at home because she knew no one would understand what it meant. I cried for the 35-year-old woman who had become everything she once dreamed of and still sat in a library hoping to be seen by the one man who never truly looked at her. A soft knock came at the door, and I froze. It opened gently. It was Diane. She stepped in slowly, her heels silent on the carpet. She didn't speak, just looked at me, mascara smudged, shoulders trembling, curled in a chair like a teenager instead of a grown woman. She moved across the room and sat in the chair opposite mine. "You don't have to say anything," I whispered, ashamed. But she did. "I saw the way he spoke to you tonight," she said, voice quiet but steady. "And I should have said something a long time ago." I looked up at her. "Why didn't you?" She took a shaky breath. "Because I was scared. Because it was easier to let things be than to confront them. I told myself he loved you in his own way." I laughed bitterly. "Does that include forgetting I exist?" "No," she said, eyes wet. "That was never love. That was ego." We sat in silence. Then I said it. "He knows, doesn't he?" She flinched. "He knows I'm not his," I continued. "That's why he's always kept me at arm's length. That's why nothing I do is ever enough." Her lips trembled. "I took a test, Mom." Her eyes locked with mine. "It's in my purse. It's confirmed." She nodded slowly, as if 100 memories had just found their missing thread. "You always had your own rhythm," she said softly. "You were never like him. You were brighter, braver. You asked too many questions, and that threatened him?" "No," she said. "It reminded him of something he couldn't control." I looked down at my lap. "All these years," I whispered, "I've been trying to earn something he was never willing to give." She reached for my hand. "You deserved better," she said. "From both of us." I didn't pull away, but I also didn't respond. Because in that moment, I wasn't sure what hurt more, the man who never claimed me, or the woman who never defended me. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the guest room on the second floor, neutral linens, minimalist art, everything sterile enough to feel like a hotel. I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan rotating above me, the slow whirl of its blades matching the loop in my mind. The speech, the silence, the car, my mother's face, the truth. By sunrise, I knew what I needed to do. It wasn't rage anymore, not grief either, just clarity, a clean, quiet kind of resolve. I rose before anyone else, took a long shower, dressed in a simple black silk dress with sharp shoulders and no embellishment, pulled my hair into a low knot, minimal makeup, bare lips, just eyes. The envelope went into my clutch, so did the key fob. Breakfast was already being prepped downstairs. The staff moved like shadows. No one made eye contact, but I could tell they knew something had shifted. This house ran on emotional undercurrents. Today's tension wasn't subtle. By the time I stepped outside into the garden, the guests were beginning to stir. Walter was scheduled to give his second, more private toast at the afternoon luncheona tradition at Monroe birthdays for just family and close friends, though the guest list still exceeded 70. I didn't wait for the toast. At 1:12 p.m., I stepped onto the patio steps and gently clinked a spoon against my glass. Not a mic, not a podium, just the clarity of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Excuse me, everyone," I said. "Before we begin the luncheon, I'd like to say a few words." There was an immediate hush. I could see Diane freeze near the buffet table. Zach stiffened. Walter looked up mid-sip of bourbon, expression unreadable. No one interrupted. So I began. "I'm Jessica Monroe, Walter's daughter. Or at least that's what I was always told." Murmurs rippled. "But last year, out of sheer curiosity, I took a genetic ancestry test. Just for fun. I didn't expect anything. But something didn't line up. So I followed up with something more formal. Something that couldn't be argued. I pulled the envelope from my clutch and held it up, not waving, not dramatic, just showing it existed. This document confirms that Walter Monroe is not my biological father. A collective intake of breath. Some gasps. A champagne flute shattered somewhere behind me. Walter stood slowly. "Jessica, I'm not finished," I said. My voice didn't tremble. "I have spent 35 years in this house, in this family, trying to become someone worth seeing. I worked harder. I achieved more. I stayed quiet when I was ignored and polite when I was erased. I bought you a car, Dad. Not because you needed it, not even because you deserved it, but because I still somehow hoped it might finally be enough." I looked at him, really looked at him, for maybe the first time in my life. "And yesterday, I watched you show that car off like a trophy. I watched you call Zach your legacy. I watched you speak of family and future as if I didn't exist." He opened his mouth, closed it. His face was tight, cold, but the facade had cracks now. I turned to the guests. "I'm not saying this for attention. I'm not even saying it for him. I'm saying it because silence protects dysfunction, and I won't protect it anymore." I crossed the patio slowly, walked straight to the head table, and laid the envelope down in front of my mother. "I found the truth. Now it belongs to you too." Her hands shook. She didn't open it. And then, with quiet finality, I reached into my clutch and pulled out the Tesla key fob. I held it in the air for a moment. This was not a gift. It was a mistake. I'm taking it back. I turned, made my way through the crowd, each step steady, each breath sharper than the last. Walter called after me, "Jessica, don't you dare walk away from this conversation." I didn't stop. I passed Zach at the garden gate. His jaw was clenched. He didn't meet my eyes. I reached the driveway. The car was still there, parked at the front, sleek and black and gleaming in the sunlight. I unlocked it with a beep, slid into the driver's seat, started the engine. The guests inside erupted in conversation. Through the windshield, I saw Walter's silhouette at the top of the steps. He wasn't shouting now. He was just standing there, staring like someone watching a painting burn. The same man who had once told me real success came from building things that lasted. I reversed slowly down the gravel driveway. The car moved with perfect smoothness, but inside, everything in me was raw. Not broken, not anymore, just exposed. I wasn't driving away from a man. I was leaving behind a myth. The myth that if you worked hard enough, if you were kind enough, if you accomplished enough, you'd finally be loved. Some people, I finally understood, with a painful kind of peace, will never give you what they're not capable of giving. The Tesla's interior was silent, broken only by the faint hum of the electric engine, and my breath, shallow but steady. I turned left at the end of the estate driveway, leaving behind the buzz of a family event that had finally stopped pretending to be whole. The road curved through familiar hills, tall oaks filtering the early afternoon sun onto the windshield. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't look back. 10 minutes later, I pulled into the private garage of the hotel I'd booked in Palo Alto. I'd made the reservation the day before just in case. Just in case I couldn't survive one more night in a house where my name had become a footnote. I handed the keys to the valet and walked inside. 3 hours passed before the phone calls began. First came Diane, then Zach, then one of my aunts. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened a bottle of mineral water from the minibar, sat by the window, and watched the late sun cast long shadows across the skyline. My phone vibrated again. I glanced down. Walter Monroe. I let it ring. A moment later, a text arrived. That was reckless and cruel. We'll talk when you're ready to apologize. I stared at the message for a full minute, then laughed quiet, stunned laughter. Even now, I was the one expected to apologize. After all these years, after all that silence, I turned off my phone. By evening, the hotel lobby was filled with murmurs and stares. Word had already traveled. You don't detonate a truth bomb in a high-profile family like the Monroes without triggering aftershocks. A young woman behind the concierge desk, maybe 22, maybe watching everything on Instagram, whispered to her coworker as I passed by. I didn't mind. Let them whisper. Let them wonder what finally broke me. Let them know that being quiet isn't the same as being weak. The next morning, the Tesla was gone from the Monroe estate. I knew this because Sofia's cousin, who'd always stood a little too far from the family circle, texted me a photo. It was parked outside her place. He couldn't handle the sight of it, she wrote. He gave it to me. Said it was too flashy to fit the family brand. I blinked. Walter had given away a $200,000 car like it was a used paperback, the very car I bought to reach him. The same gift I took back to reclaim myself, now tossed like an afterthought to avoid the memory it carried. It didn't hurt. It proved the point. He hadn't rejected the gift. He had rejected the reminder that I had once tried. I responded, enjoy it, blast the stereo, wear heels in it, spill coffee. It's yours now, she replied with a heart emoji. 3 days later, the press picked up the story. First as gossip Monroe family drama unfolds at birthday bash, but then as something deeper. A columnist from the Chronicle reached out for comment. I declined. Let the story shape itself. Let the internet theorize. I didn't owe them clarity, but I owed myself something better. So I booked a rental space, a modest brick and glass office in a quiet neighborhood in Mountain View. Then I made a call. Hi, I said, voice tight with something between hope and fear. I'd like to meet. There was a pause on the other end. Then, of course, I've been waiting. His name was Alan Monroe, though it hadn't been for long. He'd taken his mother's name after a brief, early marriage to Diane broke down in the 1980s. He had no idea he had a daughter, until now. I met him at a cafe in Los Gatos. He looked nothing like Walter. His eyes were softer. His hands trembled when he stirred his tea. He listened, really listened when I spoke. After I told him everything, he said something no one in my life had ever said. "I'm sorry I wasn't there. I didn't know. But I want to know you now, if you'll let me. No expectations, no guilt, just presence." I let him buy me a second cup of coffee. We didn't talk about DNA. We talked about books, about music, about work, about who we were, not who we weren't. And as we sat beneath a rustling sycamore, something inside me shifted. Not healed, not fixed, but beginning. Back in my apartment in New York a week later, a letter arrived in the mail. From Walter. Handwritten. 4 pages. No return address. It began with, "Jessica, I did what I thought was best. You never understood how complicated things were. I took you in. I gave you a name. I gave you a life." He used the word gave 7 times. He never used the word daughter once. By the 4th paragraph, he returned to what he did best, making it about him. "What you did was public, embarrassing, and unnecessary. I'm not ashamed of who you are, but I am ashamed of how you handled it." I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer with other documents I'd decided no longer defined me. Then I opened my laptop and finished the business plan I'd been working on for weeks. A nonprofit, the Glass House Project, a data mentorship and leadership accelerator for first-generation girls in STEMs, specifically those who had grown up in homes where validation was currency withheld. It was everything I wished someone had built for me. It wasn't revenge. It was restoration. Not about punishing the past, but about building something better in spite of it. Something that couldn't be erased with silence or overshadowed by legacy. My name would be on the door, not Monroe's, mine. 6 months later, the Tesla was long gone. I never asked where Sophia took it or what she did with it. It didn't matter. That car had been a symbol of so much I no longer carried: expectation, longing, performance. Once I let it go, everything changed. And by everything, I don't mean the world, I mean me. I still worked in data analytics. I still attended quarterly board meetings in sleek glass towers and wore navy blue suits to investor summits. But I also did something I never thought I'd do. I started saying no. No to the contracts that felt hollow. No to the projects that earned praise but drained my soul. And yes to my own voice. The Glass House Project launched 3 months after I returned from Palo Alto. We started small, 1 rented floor, 6 laptops, 8 girls from 3 boroughs, all of them first-generation students, all of them brilliant, all of them unsure if they belonged. I didn't try to impress them. I didn't recite my resume or show off my awards. I told them the truth, that success isn't a finish line, that confidence isn't innate, that sometimes the people you love most will never see you clearly, and still you rise. They listened, and then they built. By the end of our first session, they'd already developed a data model that predicted school supply shortages based on local zoning policy. One of them, Amina, presented it to a city council member and got invited to intern. Another, Lily, stayed after class and whispered, "Miss Jessica, this is the first place I've ever felt smart out loud." That was it, the moment. Not a trophy, not a press release. Just those 5 words. I felt smart out loud. Everything I'd ever needed. Everything I'd ever wanted. Diane called sometimes. It started with text tentative, careful. "I saw your project launch. The girls looked amazing. I baked your favorite coffee cake this week. Still trying to get it right. We met for lunch once, at a quiet place on the Upper West Side. She wore soft beige and no makeup, like she'd left the role of Mrs. Monroe somewhere in California. I think I failed you," she said over tea. "I think you did too," I replied. Her eyes welled up. "And yet you still let me be here." "I'm trying to figure out what forgiveness looks like," I said. "Not because you earned it, but because I need it." She nodded. "That's fair." We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But we stayed until closing. The next time we met, She brought photo-sold ones. College friends, piano recitals, handwritten letters from a boy named Alan. She placed one photo in my hand. "You look like him," she said quietly. I stared at it for a long time. A black and white shot of two students at a Berkeley protest, smiling beneath handmade signs. The girl was her. The boy? Wide-eyed, curly-haired, full of fire. It was the first time I saw my reflection in someone, without doubt. Alan and I met once more. This time, it was different. He came to New York with a backpack full of poetry books and a nervousness that reminded me of how much DNA could still surprise you. "I brought something," he said, setting a small envelope on the table. Inside was a page torn from his college journal, a letter he'd written but never sent. "I think I messed up. She was pregnant. Or might have been. She disappeared. I don't know. But if I had a daughter, I'd want her to be free. I'd want her to know she never had to become small just to fit someone's version of her." He looked up at me. "I didn't know." "I never knew. But I hope you believe that I would have tried." I nodded. "I believe you." We sat by the river afterward and talked about everything but the past. Favorite smells, rain in San Francisco. Why New York bagels taste different. He didn't ask for a title. He didn't call himself Dad. He just asked if we could talk again sometime. I said yes. The Monroe name faded. Not legally, I didn't change it. But emotionally. Publicly. Practically. When people ask now, I just said, "Jessica, I run a nonprofit." If they pressed, I gave them the story, the short version. About legacy. About silence. About the cost of pretending. I never told it to wound. I told it to warn. That not everyone with your bloodline deserves your loyalty. That sometimes walking away isn't quitting, it's choosing peace over performance. Walter never wrote again. Zachary reached out once. A bland email. "Hope all is well. No hard feelings." I deleted it without reading further. He made his choice the moment he stood in silence while I was being erased. That's the thing about family. Blood may bind you, but it doesn't protect you. Protection comes from love, from courage, from truth, and sometimes from yourself. Thanksgiving came. Sophia invited me to her home in Seattle. I said yes. When I walked in, her 2-year-old ran up to me with a smile so wide it cracked something open in my chest. "Auntie Jess." He didn't care about history. He just wanted me to see his finger painting. I helped him hang it on the fridge. During dinner, Sophia raised her glass. "I want to toast the person in this room who reminded me that speaking up is sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself. And for everyone else." We clinked glasses. Diane was there too. So was Alan. No one asked them to explain themselves. They were just there. Because this family, the one I was building, didn't require performance, only presence. After dinner, we sat on the floor eating pie from paper plates. Someone put on a playlist from the 90s. Diane hummed along. Alan laughed when I sang off-key. It was imperfect. It was wonderful. It was real. That night, I walked out onto the porch alone. The stars were out, bright, unapologetic. I thought of the girls back at the Glass House Project. I thought of Amina's voice trembling with pride, of Lily's laugh, of the moment they first saw their names printed on the nonprofit's website, centered, bold, affirmed. And I thought about all the years I spent trying to earn what I already had inside me. Worth, vision, fire. No man, no legacy, no family name could grant those things. They were mine all along. For anyone watching this, anyone who has ever felt invisible in their own family, know this. You are not alone. You are not unlovable. And most importantly, you don't need permission to exist fully. You don't need to keep shrinking to make others comfortable. Sometimes, walking away is how we begin to walk home to ourselves.